Hi, my name is Mégane Coulon and I'm a history professor working on demographic and social change in Freetown in the colony of Sierra Leone in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the colony of Sierra Leone was the place where over 99,000 liberated Africans were forcibly relocated by the British Royal Navy. They were enslaved Africans embarked on slave ships on their ways to the Americas, captured during the Middle Passage, and then forcibly relocated to Sierra Leone. In this video, I will be talking about EAP documents I used to complete my PhD to underscore the potential of these primary sources and to demonstrate how they provide great evidence to trace life experiences of individuals who lived in Freetown in the mid-19th century, especially through cross-referencing and nominal linkage across these various documents. Various topics and issues can be traced through the detailed analysis of these records from EAP443 and EAP782. I personally was able to trace life histories and experiences in Freetown connected with family and household units, business memberships, partnerships, and public and community life, property and land ownership, and slavery, among other issues. As I will be demonstrating in this video, EAP443 and EAP782 both contain a large number of documents, over 260 volumes, digitized from the Sierra Leone Public Archives located in Freetown. The analysis of these two projects gives a great snapshot into what life was like for individuals who lived in Freetown in the mid-19th century. The first one is EAP443, 19th century documents of the Sierra Leone Public Archives. The digitized materials from EAP443 include miscellaneous books, registers of alien children, which recorded the arrival of children from outside the colony who were sent to Freetown and the colony villages for education, trade, to escape the war, or escape slavery, among other reasons. There are also registers of birth, registers of death, registers of liberated Africans, and letter books. In my research, I used 4 volumes of birth registers, which recorded the birth of 1,620 children between 1857 and 1862. They contain the name, place of residence, and occupation of 884 fathers, as well as the name of 1,053 mothers and the children. This information then reveals patterns of spatial distribution, as well as provides insights into family structures by tracing single mothers or examples of polygyny. The one pictured here is the register from the 13th of April 1857 to the 12th of April 1860. It contains information on 500 births registered between those two dates. I here selected an example of a man I was able to trace through several volumes of the birth registers. On the first image on the left, at the 4th line, it states that Charles Buckner registered the birth of a child he had with Diana Klein, who was born on the 14th of January 1859. About a month later, on the 18th of February 1859, he had another child, but this time born of Harriet Endy. In the different birth registers, I found other children that Charles Buckner had with these two women. A year later, on the 11th of September 1860, he had another child born of Diana Klein, and then on the 28th of January 1861, he had another one, this time born of Harriet Endy again. All the children were recorded at the same address on Westmoreland Street. The name of the street was recorded without a number, which suggests that Charles Buckner might have lived with Diana Klein and Harriet Endy at the same address, or in adjacent houses, or at the very least, on the same street. The inhabitants of Freetown thus challenged the traditional British model of families. Polygyny was widespread among the Muslim community, as according to Islamic law, men were allowed to have 4 wives. Polygyny is also allowed and accepted among Yoruba and Mandinka communities influenced by Islam. It is unclear whether Charles Buckner was a Muslim man, but in the 4 volumes of birth registers I analyzed, I found 32 men who were clearly identified as Muslims. The clerk entered under their name, as shown in the picture, the word Mohammedan. These men also signed their names in Arabic. The birth registers, however, under-recorded the number of Muslim traders in Freetown. They were more likely to record Christian births over that of Muslim families and non-registered marriages, even though there's exceptions. There are also more fathers who were Muslim but not identified as such in the registers, including Mohamedou Savage, who was one of the leaders of the Muslim community in Fula Town, who did not have the word Mohammedan entered under his name in the birth registers. The presence of Muslim traders was central to the economy of Freetown and of the whole colony. Muslim traders expanded trade networks with regional centers such as Timbo, Cancan, or Dingere in present-day Guinea. Of the 32 men identified as Muslims, 30 were all recorded in the register between the 18th of September 1861 and the 4th of September 1862. The 2 other men were identified in 2 different volumes, one in that of the 28th of August 1858 to the 2nd of July 1860, and the other one in the registers of birth from the 14th of September 1862 to the 16th of October 1863. Women and mothers were not identified as Muslims in the registers. Other documents from EAP provide information not only on the identity of the people, but also on economic activities. Freetown was part of the British colony of Sierra Leone, where slavery was outlawed. Yet, the records show that slave trafficking activities were still ongoing and that it was difficult to deter. The miscellaneous return books from the Liberated African Department from 1826 to 1834 includes information on 34 liberated Africans who had been re-enslaved in the colony and freed a second time. The analysis of these 2 pages reveals the names of the inhabitants of Freetown who were involved in slave trafficking and shows that they surrounded themselves with individuals from outside the colony to help them adjust and develop strategies to engage in an activity that was outlawed. Traders from the surrounding areas then came to Freetown to kidnap and sell people who lived in the British colony. The miscellaneous return book indicates the identity of the enslavers, but also of those who were enslaved. The miscellaneous return books indicate the identity of the enslavers, but also of those who were enslaved. Carafala, Kota, John Davis, and George King were all sold in the Rio Pongo area in modern-day Guinea. They were embarked on the French schooner Caroline, which was captured by HMS Conflict and landed in Freetown in December 1830. Another digitized volume source as part of EAP443 allows to trace more about this story. The registers of liberated Africans recorded the arrival of liberated Africans disembarked in Freetown. The entry for French schooner Caroline reads that the ship was detained in consequence of it being discovered by the boarding officer that she had liberated Africans on board that had been kidnapped in the colony. It also provides a bit more information about their enslavement. The second project I used was EAP782, Preserving 19th Century Records in the Sierra Leone Public Archives. EAP782 includes police court and police magistrate records, dispatches from the governor of the colony to the Secretary of State for the colonies, and rough fees and fine books. These documents provide a wide range of evidence from which to understand the nature of the society that emerged in Freetown in the 19th century. There are 12 volumes of police magistrate records and 34 volumes of police court records. I only analyzed 7 of them and traced over 2,600 cases. There are thousands of more cases across the different volumes that include testimonies that are first-hand accounts of the inhabitants' lives. We can then recover some of the lives of the liberated Africans, African men and women, and enslaved Africans who escaped slavery and sought protection under the British laws of the colony. The court cases provide insights into multiple degrees of freedom and restrictions experienced by individuals who lived in Freetown, and into the degrees of inequality and inequality in a British colony in West Africa. As evidence to demonstrate the potential of these testimonies, I here selected the case of Sarah and James Palmer, which was heard at the police court in Freetown in July 1857. The specific court case underlines the role of women as home carers, and while it is only one specific story, there are a large number that still needs to be uncovered. On the 25th of July, 1857, James Palmer assaulted his wife, Sarah Palmer, because she did not cook him breakfast. James ordered her out of their house on Campbell Street and slapped her. She retaliated by throwing a stone at him. The transcript read, "I am the wife of the defendant. On Thursday the 25th of last month, he accused me of not cooking his breakfast and ordered me out of our house in Campbell Street, Freetown. He called me a damn brute and boxed me right and left with his closed hands. After this, when he took up a fence stick, I threw a pot at him. I threw a stone at him and took up fire, but did not strike with it." A witness came to testify and stated, "I saw him slap her with his hands and run into the yard for a stick when she threw a pot at him. He wanted to beat her and she seized hold of an iron, but it was taken from her by some neighbors. The iron did not strike the defendant." While underscoring the expectations that wives were supposed to organize the household and tend to their husband, the case also highlights the fact that partners, whether married or unmarried, turn to colonial officials to settle domestic disputes or to seek assistance in cases of physical abuse. Court cases do not only provide insights on domestic abuse, they open up a large area of research. Another case, heard in 1839, demonstrates women's agency over property ownership. On the 4th of April 1839, Betsy Jarrett charged John French, William Falconer, John Moore, and John Barnes of conspiring to defraud her of her deceased husband's property. After spending some time away from the colony for health reasons, she came back to Freetown in February 1839. Upon the death of her husband, she went to John French's house to ask for her husband's property, and he told her to leave. The testimony of witness William Simons, who made the deceased will, revealed that Betsy Jarrett and her husband had in fact been separated for a long time. He said that her husband had left his property to Barnes and Elizabeth Campbell, a woman who was living with him before he died. Simon stated that Betsy's husband had left her no property in his will. The case was then dismissed. The police court records do not only include cases related to offenses or crimes, but also include cases related to gambling or public order, which provide insights into some aspects of public and community life in Freetown. Testimonies from defendants, plaintiffs, and sometimes of witnesses shed light on cultural practices and on issues related to public life, and they give detail on location, games, or drinking habits. The records offer a wealth of data to understand British regulations of public life, but also how they were challenged by the inhabitants of Freetown. One common offense was playing drums at an unlawful hour. During public celebration, impromptu performances of drumming, singing, or dancing were open to every member of the community. Some of these were the Yoruba masquerade, Kolegugu, which symbolized the return of the ancestors in masking costume. During the ceremonies, names and achievements of the deceased individuals were mentioned in prayers and by the beating of drums and songs. In Freetown, they were, in the 19th century, concentrated in Fura Bay and Fula Town. Public celebrations were common, as I could find at least 20 court cases where inhabitants were being fined or committed to the House of Correction for drumming and dancing at night in Freetown. The entries in the record do not provide details on whether these performances of drumming and dances were related to religious practices, but they do give some details. For instance, on the 31st of August 1859, Joseph Atto was brought to the police court for beating a tom-tom at an unlawful hour. Police Constable Thomas Norman stated that at 3 o'clock he saw Joseph Atto beating a tom-tom at a house on Edward Street and that people from the neighborhood were performing gumbe dances. Gumbe originated in the 18th century from Jamaican Maroon communities. In Sierra Leone, it is a square-frame drum, and it was played by many members of the community. Additionally, the volumes of police magistrate and police court records consist of cases of inhabitants being charged with gambling. They provide some insights into gambling practices associated with Mende and Kru origins. It gives the names of some of the games and indicates that inhabitants were gambling money, but sometimes also copper. Gambling parties were sometimes organized. There's a case of the 5th of September 1862 when Ben Liverpool was charged with keeping a gambling house in his home. Although his address and background are not given, it is very likely that Ben Liverpool was a crewman, as many other documents from Sierra Leone indicate. As in another document held at the National Archives in London, 3 men named Ben Liverpool were identified as crewmen. Police Constable John Freeman stated that people gambled in Liverpool's house on Saturdays and on weekdays, which was forbidden by the British laws. The potential of these sources is also to cross-reference them through nominal linkage. In the records of the Court of Recovery of Small Debts from 1838 to 1840, I first found the case of Aberdeen Turner against Isaac Solomon, which was heard on the 8th of December 1838. It reveals that in 1835, Sarah Solomon and her husband Isaac Solomon placed their child under the care of Mrs. Turner, who stood as godmother for 9 years. She was Aberdeen Turner's wife. The Solomons were to pay for the maintenance and education of the child. However, in 1838, so 3 years later, Aberdeen Turner brought Isaac Solomon before the Court of Recovery of Small Debt, where he claimed £10 for the maintenance of the child, as the Solomon had not paid them. When examining police magistrate records that were digitized as part of EAP782, I found another case between Aberdeen Turner and Isaac Solomon. On the 27th of July, 1843, Solomon was brought to the police office for threatening to assault Aberdeen Turner. There is no additional information on the case, but this suggests that the issue between the Solomon and the Turners had not been resolved. In this case, having Mrs. Turner stand as a godmother did not guarantee that she would take care of the child, but rather that it was an economic transaction. To conclude, EAP443 and EAP782 provide a wide range of manuscript evidence to trace the life histories of people who lived in Freetown in the 19th century. It brings to light their voices, especially that of women and formerly enslaved people, and gives potential to trace issues across large numbers, whether qualitative or quantitative analysis. The voices of people formerly enslaved and that of women in 19th century West Africa are often difficult to trace across colonial sources. However, the sources from EAP443 and 782 highlight her big potential to work towards bridging that gap. Thank you for watching.